What does Israel need to have defensible borders after the October 7th massacres in a very tumultuous Middle East? Join us. Khaled Abu Toameh, my dear friend and colleague of so many years. One question we haven't discussed on this program, al-Shaq al-Sadlana, meaning our Middle East, we normally take a regional view. Now I think we want to step back for a minute and say, how is our country, Israel, this teeny country of 10,000 square kilometers, including Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, going to survive after October 7th? We've got to have what Labor Party leader and former Foreign Minister Yigal Allon called defensible borders. How do we make borders that are defensible when our borders were violated and we suffered the worst invasion since the founding of the state from the south? We don't have any buffer. We don't have any buffer in the south. We don't have buffer in the north. We have the hilltops of Judea and Samaria to the east, which Labor Party leader and former Foreign Minister Yigal Allon said it was absolutely essential for Israel to maintain what they call Gavahar, the Judean Samarian Hill Ridge, and the Jordan Valley to prevent any kind of attack from the east. Now we've got a bigger problem, which is the possibility of tunnel invasion from the north and the south. What are we going to do?
That's why, Dan, I say that as long as you have problematic neighbors in the south, in Gaza, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and in the north, Hezbollah, I don't see any other alternative to creating buffer zones or security zones. Now, the question is, where do you create these security zones? Do you create them inside Gaza and inside Lebanon, or do you create them inside Israel, on the Israeli side of the border? So far, Israel has not created buffer zones. There has been talk about creating a security zone, for example, in Gaza. These reports have not been confirmed, but there is an undeclared security zone on the Israeli side because many Israeli civilians have been evacuated from their homes. The same applies to the north, where many Israeli civilians have also been evacuated. So what we have right now is security or undeclared security zones on the Israeli side, both in the north and in the south. And Israel will have to decide sooner or later, because as long as you have Hamas and Hezbollah on your border, you will have to decide. I mean, the October 7th taught us that the borders are very fragile. They're easily penetrated, and that's why you need the strategic depth, I call it, in these areas. You need strategic depth in Lebanon, and you need strategic depth in Gaza if you really want to defend your borders.
That's a key point, strategic depth. That's actually the term that former Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin used and Yigal Allon used, and other prime ministers since then, including Golda Meir and Levi Eshkol. They all talked about strategic depth, which we don't have. Right today, the Israeli government is talking with interlocutors in Lebanon about pushing the Hezbollah back 11 kilometers. Well, 11 kilometers is not going to give us strategic depth. So we really have a major issue. As you said very correctly, you have 85,000 Israelis have been evacuated from their homes in the north, are living in hotels throughout Israel, and are frightened to go back to their homes because you don't have that buffer. You don't have the strategic depth. So this is exactly why, following the 2006 first Iranian-Israel war that used the Hezbollah in the north, that UN Security Council Resolution 1701 demanded that the Hezbollah pull back 20 kilometers north of the Israeli border, behind the Litani River, and that hasn't happened.
I think it's Resolution 1701, which has never been implemented.
That's right.
And now there are negotiations through the Americans and through other parties to implement this. I don't see Hezbollah agreeing to it, by the way. Even if they do, I don't see how UNIFIL or any other force in South Lebanon can enforce it or can prevent Hezbollah and other Palestinian groups from attacking Israel. That's why it goes back again to security presence or security belt. I don't know if you remember that term they used to use back then when Israel was inside South Lebanon. The same applies to Gaza. It all goes back down to who your neighbors are. And as long as you have problematic neighbors like that, there is no other way but to create buffer zones. In the West Bank, you do have strategic depth. I mean, Israel is sitting all, on the border with Jordan. Israel is in control of the Jordan Valley. I call that strategic depth because Israel is not sitting on the green line. Can you imagine if Israel was sitting on the green line? I mean, we would not be able to fly through Ben Gurion Airport.
But this is one of the great fears that Israel has over the calls coming from our dearest friends in Washington as well as in Western Europe for Israel to allow the establishment of a Palestinian state, what they call close to the 67 lines. That eliminates, eviscerates any kind of strategic depth that you're talking about. And many of our viewers don't or may be unaware that the topographical advantage that Israel has to survive, we're talking about the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, is that the 4,200 feet above sea level is the top of the Judean Samarian hill ridge. Now, the Dead Sea is 1,500 feet below sea level, so you have a net rise of these 4,200 feet. So Israel has to sit on those hill ridges that dominate, looking east towards Jordan and looking west towards the Mediterranean Sea. If we don't sit there,
Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, and the Houthis will be sitting there. That's the problem.
Exactly.
And I think that many Westerners, when they talk about the two-state solution or the creation of a Palestinian state, they don't really know the reality on the ground. They don't know, first of all, how small this land is. They don't know that in the West Bank, for example, Jews and Arabs live on top of each other, next to each other, across the street from each other, and sometimes in the same building. So they need to take a deep look at the map and see the land we're talking about. They also need to notice that large parts of the West Bank are actually in the heart of Israel, and that if Israel goes back to 67, it will be reduced to a 9 or 10 mile narrow strip. Which, I don't see any state that can defend itself. These are not defensible borders.
That's right. So when you're talking about a 9 or 10 mile strip, you're actually saying the width from the western side of a potential Palestinian entity, which would be, let's say, Tulkarem, the 7 major Palestinian Arab cities in the West Bank currently, all of them, by the way, autonomous at this. Yeah. You pointed out on numerous occasions, the Palestinian Authority calls themselves on their stationery the State of Palestine, right?
Yeah, and Mahmoud Abbas is the president of the State of Palestine.
And the State of Palestine, as they call themselves right now, contains primarily the 7 major Palestinian cities in Area A of the West Bank, and the westernmost border of those cities at the narrowest width is only 9 miles wide between that Palestinian border and the Mediterranean Sea.
Yeah.
So they're not defensible, which is why every Israeli government, except for one break in 2000 with Ehud Barak, who tried a different security concept, which was called security arrangements, which didn't exactly work very well. As a matter of fact, Mohammed Dakhlan, who today is being touted by some of our friends in the Middle East as being the new leader for Gaza, he himself said no chance for a demilitarized Palestinian state with any kind of Israeli forces anywhere near Palestinian population centers. So that cancels out any possibility for defensible borders, for security arrangements, and many of our friends in the West are unaware of this.
Then those who talk about a demilitarized Palestinian state, what mechanism can enforce that? Who will supervise? Who will make sure that this Palestinian state does not smuggle weapons from Iran, from Jordan, and from other countries? Gaza was an independent Palestinian state, and it was even under blockade. That didn't prevent Gaza and Hamas from bringing weapons into Gaza. So even if someone says, okay, I agree to have a demilitarized Palestinian state, who is going to give guarantees that it will remain like that? that there won't be weapons over there. There are already too many weapons, not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. So that's another issue. I mean, before we talk about a Palestinian state and a demilitarized Palestinian state, we need to take these things into consideration. And again, look who your neighbor are. Look who your neighbor is. And if you have problematic neighbors that break agreements and that break truces and they cannot be trusted and that are, committed to your destruction, then, this whole talk about a demilitarized Palestinian state becomes a joke.
It becomes a joke for two reasons. One, because there's no Palestinian leader that would ever agree to having a demilitarized Palestinian state. And number two, it doesn't work. As we saw in Gaza, I mean, the October 7th mass murder, invasion of sovereign Israel. We weren't talking about settlers, so-called settlers and settlements. And we were talking about, the most vulnerable Israeli community sitting inside what the entire universe calls the, pre-67 lines, which everyone is using as a point of departure for Israel's final border. Well, look what happened. We were just invaded with no defensible borders and mass murdered. So all of this is going to have to change as we go forward. Israel's going to have to control the airspace as it has been, but it's controlled the airspace. It's going to have a buffer definitely on its own side of the Philadelphia corridor. I'm talking about the southern Israel now. And obviously there are sensitivities with our Egyptian neighbors that with whom we've had a peace treaty with for more than 40 years. And obviously it's a very vital and valuable and important relationship for Israel. But this is exactly what the Iranian regime and their Hamas proxy wanted to uproot, is that relationship.
Dan, there's another issue regarding the demilitarized Palestinian state. October 7 taught us that you don't need heavy weapons. You don't need tanks and Apache helicopters and artillery to kill Jews or to kidnap Jews or to injure Jews. You can do it with RPGs, with AK-47s, and with light weapons, handguns. And gliders?
Yes.
Yeah. So, the whole issue of demilitarized becomes irrelevant in this case because any Palestinian regime that is not committed to peace and that does not recognize Israel's right to exist and that raises generation after generation on the glorification of suicide bombings and jihad and messages like death to Israel and death to America will not honor any agreement with Israel. And will always continue to gather weapons and bring in more weapons and prepare Palestinians for the next phase of the struggle against Israel.
This raises a larger question, which is a reset in terms of what they say, toda'ah, or perception, narrative, telling the story, because for so many decades, Israel had been part of a calculation that had emerged after the 1967 Six-Day War, where Israel emerged miraculously, launching a preemptive strike against the Egyptian Air Force and as well as Syria, and miraculously survived. But the problem is we had subscribed to a concept called Land for Peace. It was a formula, Land for Peace with the major Arab countries. Now that formula carried over to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. But now we see that concept of land for peace has blown up, has been detonated, and cost thousands and thousands of lives. So that's no longer relevant, which means that we've got to go back to the drawing board and really reconstitute our requirements and the narrative of those requirements for the international community within Israel and so on. That's not simple. It's not a simple task.
Dan, I agree with you, but I just want to point out that the land for peace formula is relevant for Hamas and some Palestinians, but they understand it in a different way. Give me all of the land, and I might give you peace. Let me replace Israel with an Islamic state.
So is that PIECE or PEACE?
Exactly. What they are saying is, look, this land, all of it is Muslim-owned land. No non-Muslim is entitled to 1 inch of it. So for them, peace can be achieved if you dismantle Israel and you send the Jews back to where they came from, and those who want to stay will have to live under an Islamic regime.
So this really raises a question of how do you retell your story, especially to the Western world, which is putting a lot of pressure on Israel now after this unprecedented massacre to again offer a prize for genocide.
Yeah, I think the timing is very problematic. I mean, even if you want to talk about a Palestinian state, I mean, you're choosing the wrong timing. First of all, if you find me 4 or 5 people in Israel who will agree to the establishment of a Palestinian state under the current circumstances, please let me know. And the timing is problematic because it sends a message to Hamas and other Palestinians that you will be rewarded for what you did on October 7th.
Absolutely. And when we talk about what are the minimal survivability requirements for Israel, it's, I think, critically important that we lay them out right now on the table. Number one is going to be buffer zones, as we said, in the south and the north, so that Israel has enough early warning, which is always part of our national security concept. It was early warning and then deterrence and then total victory. Those were the 3 points of the triangle of the national security concept. So here we've got to have enough early warning, boots on the ground in the south, boots on the ground in the north, having a number of kilometers of what's called, as you said, enough of a buffer zone or some sort of minimal strategic depth, so that we can cut off those and uproot those tunnels, which are all over the place in the south, in the north, and even in Judea, Samaria, the West Bank. We hear all sorts of indications of tunnels being built there. So that's number one. Number two is the airspace. We will continue to control the airspace, what's called the electromagnetic space as well. All of the borders Israel's going to have to maintain all of the national security and military capabilities to go into these areas, whether it's the new Gaza entity or whether it's the evolving Palestinian entity in the West Bank. There's no choice. Israel will always have to have control over the borders.
Yes, and Israel should make it very clear that all these security measures, including the buffer zones, are temporary measures that will remain in effect until there's a partner on the other side, until there's a regime or a sovereign party on the other side that can prevent terrorism and act like a peace partner.
So the question is, will that, in your view, what are the prospects of that happening? It's a generational shift that needs to take place.
It will take time because this is a war between Israel and Iran, and Israel is facing Iran's proxies in Gaza and in Lebanon. It's easier to get rid of Hamas in Gaza, but the issue with Lebanon is different. I think sooner or later Israel will have to take action in Lebanon against Hezbollah. And then the question is, what will Iran's response be? So it will take time. It's not going to happen in a generation or two, but in the meantime, in order to defend your borders and prevent another October 7th from happening, you need to have buffer zones. Israel will have to decide, are the buffer zones on the Israeli side or on the Lebanese side and the Gaza side?
That's true. And as long as the Iranian octopus stays in place, nothing is really going to change. You can cut off the tentacles, but the tentacles grow back.
There is a feeling, Dan, that there isn't enough pressure on the mullahs in Tehran to stop this. I don't see the U.S. administration, Europeans, and others, putting enough pressure on them. It could change a lot if heavy pressure was applied on the Iranian regime, but we don't see that.
We're not seeing it from the United States, clearly. I mean, the United States is seeing actually the problem in reverse. They're seeing that the failure of Israel and the Palestinians to reach some sort of a territorial compromise is that which is inflaming the passions of the Iranians and other actors in the region, when we know very clearly in Israel that the source of the problem begins in Tehran and extends to Lebanon and to Gaza.
The head of the snake.
Yemen.
You need to go to the head of the snake. I mean, you can't stop the snake without chopping off its head. And Israel, the U.S. or someone else will have to deal with the head of the snake. if you want to stabilize the situation in this part of the world.
But so in the meantime, Israel has to take these measures that have been known conceptually as defensible borders from Israel. As a matter of fact, people can go to jcpa.org. We've written a number of monographs on the critical requirements for defensible borders for Israel. It's critically important to understand what Israel is going to need minimally to survive in the Middle East, in a very, very small nation state that without Judea and Samaria is 8,000 square kilometers, with Judea and Samaria 10,000 square kilometers, but it's nothing compared to land masses hundreds of times the size of Israel, and surrounded by all of these tumultuous neighbors.
The idea of a two-state solution sounds very attractive, but it sounds attractive and appealing to those who are unfamiliar with the reality on the ground.
Right. So there you have it, a very short and sweet analysis by the two of us. We encourage people to go to jcpa.org, subscribe to the Daily Alert, follow us every day. Khaled and I lead the 4 p.m., 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time War Room Diplomacy briefing. We talk about these issues there. Here we wanted to take a step back from the greater Middle East and talk about what Israel, as an indigenous member of the Arab Muslim majority Middle East, needs to survive in this very, very, I would call it the roller coaster region. So please join us. It's really a pleasure having this more strategic conversation between the two of us, but we encourage our viewers to go to jcpa.org and just put in defensible borders for Israel and pull down the PDF file. And for the meantime, a very fascinating, compact coffee discussion here today from the center of Jerusalem at Al-Shaq Al-Sadlana, our Middle East. Thank you so much, Khaled Abu Toameh.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you.